we are very pleased today to have this webinar. It's part of our efforts to provide engaging content to alumni. And so this is a CEIBS webinar series, and today is the Convergence of Economic Theory, Common Prosperity, and the Economics of Mutuality. We're very pleased to have three excellent speakers, and it will be moderated by Associate Professor of Strategy at CEIBS, Peter Moran. And so I hand over the mic to Peter. Thank you so much for joining us, and all the best.
Thank you very much. So hello, everyone. Welcome to this CEIBS seminar on the Convergence of Economic Theory, where we will explore two promising approaches to addressing the many economic inequities that have been pervasive and widening throughout the world, or is commonly referred to as the growing gap between efficiency and equity. My name is Peter Moran. I'm on the faculty here at CEIBS. I was on the faculty here at CEIBS in the Strategy and Economics department until I retired in 2020, and now I'm a visiting professor. The two approaches we're going to explore today are common prosperity and the economics of mutuality. In essence, they are two different schools of thought, each approach from a different angle, but with considerable overlap. For example, the common prosperity is government-led, it's at the country level, and it takes a more macro perspective. While the economics of mutuality, or EOM as I'll refer to it, is company-led. And it emerges from a more micro perspective. To discuss these two schools of thought, I'm delighted to be joined today by CEIBS professor Oliver Roux. Also with us is the founder of the Economics of Mutuality Foundation, Bruno Roche. Professor Roux has published over 70 papers in top economics, finance, accounting, and management journals. He holds degrees in economics, international economics, statistics, and has a PhD in finance. Bruno Roche is the founder of the Economics of Mutuality, the author of two books on EOM. I think you can see one of them behind him, and was the chief economist at Mars from 2006 to 2020. So I'd like to begin by asking Professor Roux to explain the government-led approach. So Oliver, can you tell us what common prosperity means here in China, how it came about, and where it stands today among China's evolving priorities?
Sure. Thanks, Peter, for the invitations. It's an honor to attend this webinar. So I prepare a few slides to explain what common prosperity means in China. Let me put on the screen. Okay, so first, before I share my views on common prosperities in China, first I have to make a statement because my sharing only reflects my personal interpretations of the common prosperity policy, because I'm not the policy makers. So I'm not the think tank behind the policy makers. So this is only my interpretations from the public documents. As Mr. Xi noted in the Chinese Party Congress address to build a Chinese modernization country in all respects, the China must first and foremost pursue high quality development. And that development will be party's top priority in governing and rejuvenating China. There are 5 characteristics of Chinese modernizations I put on the screen. The Chinese modernization is modernization of a huge population. So if China achieves modernization and become a high income country, it will more than double the percentage of the world population living in a high income economies from the current 16% to 34%. So the Chinese modernization is modernization of common prosperity. And it is also a modernization of both material and a culture ethical advancement. And Chinese modernization is modernization featuring the harmony between the humanity and the nature. It is also a modernization of the peaceful development. And the concept of the common prosperity is rooted in China's top-level design and guiding policies, and run through the country's economic development trajectory. Since the launch of the reform and opening up in the late 70s, the China economy has fulfilling the first part of Mr. Deng Xiaoping's idea: let some people get rich first, so they can stimulate others, and thus realizing common prosperity in China. At the landmark third plenum of 11th Central Committee of December 1978, at that meeting, Deng Xiaoping transformed the party's focus from waging class struggle to socialist modernization. 4 years later, at the 20th Party Congress in September 1982, a new principle contradictions between the people's growing material and cultural needs and the backward level of social productions was laid out. And the practice of the socialism with Chinese characteristic is pursuit of the full modernization, was declared as the party's general aim. The high growth era of China's development had well and truly begun. The 35 years later, a new era of modernization was introduced at the 19th National Party Congress. At that October 2017 meeting, Mr. Xi put forward his own principal contradictions between the unbalanced, inadequate development and the people's ever-growing needs for a better life, and inaugurated a new era of socialism with the Chinese characteristic that established a new ideological framework of inclusion, equity, sustainability-based growth. So the common prosperity is the key conceptual elements of this new development and the modernization-centered framework. So the origin of the common prosperity concept derives from a speech by Mr. Xi at the Central Financial and Economic Affairs Commission meetings in August 2021. In the speech, Xi lists a number of the social-economic focus areas, including the need to improve the balance, coordinations, and inclusiveness of development, expanding the size of the middle-income worker group, promoting the equalization of the basic public service, strengthen the regulations and adjustment of the high income, and comprehensively drive forward rural revitalization. So the fairness was to be honored just as much as efficiency in the course of high quality development. The priority was to promote the olive-shaped income distribution structure with a large middle income and two small ends. Most importantly, the common prosperity was to be the prosperity of all people, and the whole society was not to be applied in a way that divided urban from the rural or the eastern part of China from the center or western regions in China. Looking back at the recent histories, we can see a change of the focus between the efficiency and the fairness. The absolute fairness in China before 1978 result in a very low efficiency and underdevelopment. Afterwards, during the reform and opening up periods, efficiency become the priority and the key theme of the time, with due considerations given to the fairness. The efficiency relies on the incentive. Those who make the pie bigger will get a large shares. The outcome we can see today is 40 years of the remarkable economic boom that make China the second largest economy in the world. And its per capita income has reached the level of up middle income countries. However, the Gini coefficient almost hit a record high. It is estimated that China had as many as more than 1,000 billionaires and 5 million millionaires measured in the US dollars in 2020. On the other hand, more than 600 million Chinese citizens continue to live on a monthly income of 150, as the former Prime Minister Li Keqiang had once pointed out. So over the past decades and a half, the country's income Gini coefficient has lingering between 0.46 and 0.49. As we all know, a level over 0.4 is typically regarded as the red line for inequality, with the wealth Gini coefficient being even starker. During the same period of time, the rural and urban region and industrial gaps become widened. China has already made significant progress with urbanizations, with the rate currently stand at around 60%, up from 36% in 2000, but still lags behind the average 82% for the high-income country and 65% for the middle-income countries. So the average per capita disposable income of the people living in the rural area in 2020 was 61% lower than those living in the urban areas. In 2019, the per capita disposable income of the wealth 20% of urban household was not more than 90,000 RMB, almost 5 times higher than the average income of the poorest 20%. So the common prosperity is the reflection of the most important issue in economics, which is the trade-off between efficiency and equity, so-called Adam Smith problems. Adam Smith's problem suggests that Smith's work on ethics, which is supposedly assume altruistic human motivations, contradicts to his political economy, which alleged assumed egoism. The wealth of the nation focuses on the economic man, selfish, self-interest, invisible hands, and efficiency. The theory of the moral sentiment focuses on the social man's, altruism, government, equities. So the trade-off, the equity market implying Pareto efficiency, refer to the outcome of set-off exchange between the decision-making units in the market, where it will be impossible to modify how the exchange occurred to make one party better off without making another party decidedly worse off. Put it the other way, the efficient market is the one optimized the production and allocation of the resource given the existing factor of the production. And the equitable market means distribution of the goods and service throughout society, and the profits received by the firm are fair. So the trickle-down economics is an example of efficient market approach. It is a term used to describe the belief that if the higher income earners gain an increase in the salary, then everyone in the economy will better as their increased income, and the wealth filtered through to all the sections in society. If the richest gain an increase in the wealth, then they will spend proportionally this actual wealth. And this actual wealth will cause an increased demand for goods and services, causing a high employment and a rise in wages. The high wages will also cause multiplier effects. And the cut in tax increase the incentive to work. Lower income tax encourage people to work longer, and the lower corporation tax encourage business to invest and create wealth. Alternatively, the wealthy may invest their increased wealth. If the wealth is invested in the new business, it will create new jobs and increase the income of those employed. So higher spending and investment will stimulate the economic activity, leading to a rise in tax revenue. Higher tax revenue can fund the public projects such as the healthcare, education, welfare payment to the poor. However, there are many economists who was kind of skeptical of the belief in trickle-down effects. One reason the wealthy have a higher margin propensity to save. And also in recent years, wealth has been saved in offshore countries to avoid paying tax. Therefore, when the wealthy gain extra income, only small percentage can filter through to a low-income workers. Also, some studies suggest that increased income inequality can lead to this inequality being solidified through educational opportunities, wealth accumulation, and the growth of monopoly power. Furthermore, increased inequality may lead to lower rate of economic growth. So academic research documents that great inequality actually be detrimental to the economic growth. So if the market is inequitable, market participants will likely not be provide equal access to the income, education, goods, services, and housings. So increased inequality can manifest in three different economic mechanisms, namely the demand side, supply side, and political economy. Inequality is commonly observed on the demand side through the rich spending a smaller fraction of their income than the poor, and it drives a reduction in overall consumer spendings, and leading to a further accumulation of capital for the wealthy, and the reduction in the consumer spending is the result of diminishing marginal utility. So the diminishing marginal utility of the income and the wealth suggests that as income increase, individual gain correspondingly smaller increase in the satisfaction and happiness levels. So the inequality is also observed on the supply side through the credit constraints on education, where the poor students receive a worse education. It is detrimental to the longer economic growth because it leads to a further inequitable outcomes. Furthermore, the barriers of entry for the poor people to start a business lead to a few entrepreneurs from the underprivileged backgrounds. And in terms of a social economy, the political economy is another common mechanism where the inequality manifests itself. When the income inequality reaches a certain level, it will distort incentive mechanisms. And if the fruits of economic development was excessively concentrated in the smaller number of people, the masses, who can only get a small piece of pie, will lose the incentive to keep on striving for a better life. At the same time, economic vitality will decrease, and the momentum of the innovation will be weakened, which eventually will result in a low desire society. So the polarization of the rich and the poor will also increase the social anxieties and cause another social problems. So severe income polarization is often accompanied by a narrow space to advance in the society, increasing the risk of the middle class slipping the backwards. As the anxiety of the class slipping increases, the arms race in the children education intensified. And when the competition among the younger peers become more intense, opportunities for the advance more remote. Fertility rate keeps declining. So the political theory states that too much inequality leads to revolutions. Historically, there have been many uprisings that actually lead to a less income inequality. So overall, the social trend in the Western is shifting from the liberalism to the social democracy. And the extreme populism and anti-globalization movement was also on the rise. All this phenomenon reflect the consequence of income inequality. So are the richest nations are happiest? Are people with the highest income and wealth happier than those on lower income? Does the increase in the income and the wealth actually increase the happiness? For each individual, the question may be different. Sorry, pick a millionaire and their attitude towards money may be very different. But it does give a strong justification for progressive tax and the redistribution of income. So in the game theory, we are familiar with the prisoner's dilemma, which is one of the most well-known concepts in the modern game theories. So the typical prisoner dilemma is set up in such a way that both parties chosen to protect themselves at the expense of other participants. So as a result, both participants found themselves in a worse state than if they had cooperated with another in a decision-making process. So the prisoner's dilemma presents a situation where both parties, separated and unable to communicate, must each choose between the cooperating with the other or not. So the highest reward for each party occurs when both parties choose to cooperate. So given all these economic theories, the common prosperity is a Chinese solution to the trade-off between the efficiency and equity. So China's household consumption as a percentage of GDP was well below other countries at a similar stage of development, which means there are plenty of scope to catch up. Essential for China to change its development model to nurture consumptions and services, because investment infrastructure credit-driven model is already deep into misallocation of resource and inefficiency, and encouraging the financial instabilities. So reducing inequality and unlock the latent spending power of the hundreds of millions of people who are stuck in the rural area or in low-paying jobs. So the reform of the factors such as the land and the labors, which have lagged behind. Huge number of migrant work, they have moved to the cities, but are still unable to join the same benefits as those with urban household registrations. So the collective bargaining is almost non-existent. And collectively, the owned rural land is still not treated in the same way as the urban land when it comes to the ownership rights and pricing. So the redistributing the income through tax reform and the primary distribution, which is carried out by the market, according to the principle of efficiency, is the fact remunerations obtained through the capital, labor, and other factors. So the redistribution is carried out by the government through the taxation, social security, and the transfer of the payments in accordance with the principle of efficiency and equity, with the emphasis on the equity and the tertiary distribution mechanism is driven by the donation from the individual. So the policy should be introduced in 4 areas. Okay, some are low-hanging fruits. For example, the property tax should be levied as soon as possible. The inheritance gift tax should be studied. Second, a comprehensive individual tax system should be established to expand the scale of taxpayers through the broad tax base and the lower tax rate, and set differentiate tax rates, encourage scientific and technology innovations. Third is consumption tax should be reformed and improved, and it should focus on abolishing the tax items that has become daily consumers' goods. In the original scope of taxation, increase the taxations on the newly added luxury products or services and high-level income. So finally, charitable giving and other treasury distribution should be encouraged, and the donation amount can be directly deducted before tax. So finally, common prosperity also can provide opportunity for the foreign investors. Okay, so the China's common prosperity drives the stance to create both risk and opportunities for foreign investment in the following 3 areas. For example, the healthcare, wellness, environment, and the clean technology and retail consumption. Okay, so this is all my interpretations and on the common prosperity in China. What's the background and what's the purpose and how are going to deliver to accomplish the common prosperity in China. So I will stop here and then pass the time back to Peter.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for that macro perspective and those insights on China and what you envision going forward. I'd like now to turn to Bruno and ask you, Bruno, if you can summarize, first of all, the essence of economics of mutuality and what you see or may see as the key overlap and the differences with this idea of common prosperity.
Yes, indeed. So thank you so much for this comprehensive summary, Oliver. I really enjoyed every single bit of it, and I will now try to let me check to share my where is it? Here we go. I'm going to share a few slides. Yep. Hold on, view. Give me 1 second. Yeah. Can you see me?
Yep.
Yeah, good, very good. Okay, so thank you again, Oliver, and I will try to go quickly through a few slides. So this is me and my family. So I'm a father of millennials and also Gen Z people. So I care about the next generation, as you can imagine. So I'm just a few about myself. I'm Belgian French. I now live in Geneva. I studied economic and finance, like Oliver. We have something in common. My PhD is in finance, but I also studied philosophy. And I've been the former economist, chief economist of Mars, a company that sells Mars bar, chewing gum, pet care. It's pretty well known in China. And I founded the Economics of Mutuality with Oxford and Mars. So, but it all started with a very similar question that you had, Oliver, which is essentially what should be the right level of profits? And to my surprise, this actually is not a new question. It's been part of the history of mankind for the last several thousand years. And here I just quote like a quote from a guy called a man who was the King Solomon back 3,000 years ago. And he came up with this quote to say, well, a man may give freely and still his wealth will be increased. And another one may keep more than his rights, but only come to be in need. So here, essentially, philosophically, there is a relationship between how much you give and how much you receive. And in a sense, in my view, there are two elements of wealth creation here. There is the paradigm of buying and selling, which is actually the market efficiency, if you like. But there is also this giving and receiving, which is more about the theory of moral sentiment, right? So if you look at the two sides of Adam Smith's equation, yes, buying and selling is all about the invisible hands there, but giving and receiving is all about the moral sentiment. And in a sense, every human being has these two components in his life, and every organization and every society and every civilization actually has to make this trade-off. And the point is of what we are trying to do here, similarly to the common prosperity, is to try to, of course, to identify what these trade-offs are, but also to what extent they can work together to create a higher level of prosperity and happiness. To my surprise, actually, this notion of the right level of profit has been a complete blind spot in management literature. And the only response we had is essentially this quite well-known quote of Friedman, who said that there is one and only one social responsibility of business, is to use its resources to engage in activities designed to increase its profits. So we all know this actually has been the mantra for the last 50 years. And it worked very well. If I look at actually the profit and growth over the last 40 years across the top 1,000 companies, you can see actually that the growth actually is quite cyclical, right? But the profitability goes straight up. So you could argue, how is it possible? I mean, of course, you could argue that the increase in profitability is coming from innovation, from R&D, but maybe actually it's also taking place at the expense of other forms of wealth, right? And essentially, this is what happened. You see, the top 100 economies today are made of 31 countries and 69 corporations. So in a sense, you could argue that, I mean, there has been a shift of wealth creation from the public sector, government, to the private sector. So this Friedman theory worked very well for the owner of financial capital or financial assets. But at the expense of labor remuneration. And here I show some statistics about the income increase share for capital and workers at a global level. So you see, people who have a financial capital are by far the winner of this economic model. The people with high education, like probably people around in this particular webinar, we are, as Bourdieu said, we are the dominees of the dominant, right? So we are on the right side, but we only get a small share of actually how much wealth is being given to the capital owners. But the people with lower education are the big loser. And maybe I'm going to shock you, but my assumption is that there is the same proportion of idiots and smart people in every single category. Being rich and educated doesn't make you smart, and being poor and uneducated doesn't make you stupid. In my view, there is the same proportion of talent in every single category. And this is a problem, actually, because if there is too much inequality in the system, at some stage, it becomes unstable socially. And this is where we are at the moment. If you look at the planets, it's even worse, actually. Nowadays, it takes about 1.7 planets to support the consumption model that we have. And if the world were to consume the way we consume in the West and in China, it would actually probably require 7, 8 planets. So you don't need to have a PhD in economics to understand that this model is no longer sustainable. And the world actually has changed quite dramatically if you think about the last 30, 40 years. First of all, there are new forms of scarcities. And money is overly abundant, while we need 1.7 planets to sustain the economy. And we know that the share of wealth for the top 1% has reached 27% in G7 countries. So when I teach economics to my students, I usually say that economics is not a very complicated discipline. It's all about the management of scarcities. 50 years ago, in the Western world, financial capital was scarce, but natural resources were overly abundant, right? So at that time, 50 years ago, it kind of made sense to invent a system that would eventually create financial capital, because it was something that were lacking. Nowadays, it's just the opposite. Financial capital is overly abundant, and other forms of capital, natural resources, social and human capital, are scarce. So the economic model will adjust. There is no other options, not being ideological, just like rational thinking. Hopefully, this change will happen through research, education, responsible behavior from business, responsible behavior from government, but it will happen. Otherwise, it will happen through either natural catastrophes or social unrest or war. The second big thing that took place in the last 50 years is that the size and influence of large multinational corporations. I shared already the statistics. The third one is the rising middle class, right? There will be 5.2 billion people by 2030, and 2/3 of the world population from 50% today. So the center of gravity is shifting. And there is also, as you're all aware of, because I'm speaking to a Chinese audience, there will be a de-Westernized trend. So it's not at all the end of history. Actually, it is the end of history, right? So nowadays, the G7 country represent roughly 10% of the world, right, in terms of population, and 35% of the GDP, from 80% just a few years ago. And this actually, and because the West has been the place where this concept of liberal democracy and economic liberalism, human rights have taken place, this principle which have been seen until recently as universal are being even challenged. So we are here witnessing a big shift actually in the way the economy is running. I like this quote actually from Nobel Prize Joseph Stiglitz. Like the dieter who would rather do anything to lose weight than actually eat less, this business elite would save the world through social impact investing, entrepreneurship, sustainable capitalism, philanthrocapitalism, artificial intelligence, market-driven solutions. They would fund 1 million of these buzzwordy programs rather than fundamentally questions the role of the game, or even alter their own behavior to reduce the harm of the existing distorted, inefficient, and unfair rules. And in my view, the fundamental question is what should be the right level of profits. So is there a future to the market economy? I think so, but not in its current form. Historically, if you go back several thousand years, three inputs have always been essential to drive prosperity: the land that provides natural resources, the people who transform and add value through human and social capital, and the money that brings liquidity into the system. And actually, the financial capital is meant to provide liquidity into the system. Financial capital is not meant to measure unit of wealth. And today, we have a problem with financial capital because it's not meant to be a unit of accumulation. It's meant to be a tool for liquidity. And because money has become a tool to accumulate and measure wealth, it is losing its identity, and therefore it is also losing its value. And in terms of how you measure that, the way we measure natural capital is starting, but still elementary. The way we measure the value of people and society is broken and disparate. And actually today there are probably more slaves in the system than even 200 years ago. And but on the other hand, the way we measure financial capital is overly effective. So I think there is a fundamental shift to what we call capitalism. And you have, at the moment, on the bottom left, you have financial capitalism, which is all centered on the creation of financial capital for the company and its shareholders. And the type of relationship that exists is power relationship, right? And because that's why size matters in financial capitalism. The bigger you are, the more pressure you can exert on your suppliers and on your customer. And it is fundamentally a value extraction model. It is a financial value extraction model at the expense of other forms of capital, social, human, and natural. And as we said, it works. But it's not because it works, it is not suboptimum. I mean, slavery worked also. Slavery actually is a wonderful financial capital model, okay, but not sustainable. So I think we are moving into a different type of value creation equation. And it's what I call mutual capitalism, which is purpose-centered value creation for the company and its ecosystem with a new role for finance. And here we are moving away from financial capital creation, but we are moving into the creation of multiple forms of capital. And we're moving away from a power relationship to embrace mutual relationship. That's essentially what I would like to spend now the next 10 minutes. What it means? It starts with what is purpose? Purpose as strategy. Then there is an element of ecosystem mapping and orchestration. There is also an element of non-financial performance metrics. And then we need to come up with a notion of true profits. And that means, and I know I'm talking to business school, it means actually changing, modifying the way we are teaching business in business schools, which what I call expanding leadership. And you know, traditionally, the firm is at the center of the ecosystem, right? In the new paradigm, it is the purpose that is at the center of the ecosystem. And the firm is in the second category, just like stakeholders among others. But what is purpose? The purpose of business is not about maximizing profits. It's about to produce profitable and scalable solutions to the problems of people and planet, not profiting from creating problems for people and planet. And I believe that every single organization can take this generic definition to say, what are the most significant breakdown that exists in my ecosystem as a company that I can find a way to solve in a profitable and scalable way? And what are actually, how much profit do I make at the moment from creating problems to people and planet? And out of this definition, you see, out of this generic definition, many companies could come up with a very unique and distinctive and impactful purpose definition. I mean, I would like to encourage you, each of you, actually, to move away from the nice, lofty, not specific purpose definition, but be very honest as an organization. How much profit do you make from creating problems? How much profit do you make from creating problems to people on the planet? And what are the profitable and scalable solutions that you can invent in your business to solve some of these problems in a profitable and scalable way? That actually will define your purpose. And this is actually a type of growth model that will eventually not only help your company become more resilient, more impactful, but also, in a sense, more aligned with the overall purpose of companies. And this is where actually I believe that the work that we're doing here from a corporate perspective really joins or meets the objective of the common prosperity agenda. this is the next few slides. So out of this work, where you have the purpose which is defined and which actually is shared between a number of stakeholders, the employees, the customer, the end consumer, the competitors, the shareholder, of course, the community at large, the planet and suppliers, then out of this analysis, you can actually come up with a set of pain points and to address also the capability that you have as a firm to address this pain point. And this is where you have to come up with a good understanding of how much human capital, how much social capital, how much natural capital, and how much financial capital you are creating or destroying. I repeat that. You can have actually a fair assessment of how much capital you can destroy and or create through the exercise of your company. And then you end up with well, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but we spent the last 20 years actually defining how this different capital work in a company, so that actually you can actually measure how much natural capital, how much social capital, how much human capital you create and or consume as you are developing your business. You know how much capital you create or destroy in terms of profit and loss. And this is where the concept of true profit and loss accounting becomes important. So we came up with this concept of a single bottom line, which we call true profit. And this true profit actually is a relatively simple way, is accounting for cost approach to management account, which actually help company define their true profits. So the true profit will take into account the positive and negative externalities that a company generates in its ecosystem across social, human, natural capital. And if the true profit is above financial profits, that means actually the company is a net contributor to the community. If the true profit is below the financial profit, it means actually that the company takes more than it should, right? So the delta between the true profits and the financial profits is a fair assessment of how responsible or how common prosperity or how mutual is a company vis-a-vis its ecosystem. And it will help companies actually align with the upcoming regulation. Because the regulation, I know it's also coming in China, Oliver, so maybe you have to say a few words about it, but in globally with ISSB and at the EU level with IFRAG, the regulation is on the way to force companies to disclose their social, natural, human capital, negative and positive externalities. And this regulation here will be used by government to guide their tax policies. So you see the train is coming up, right? And now it is a choice for every single business leaders to adjust. Either they are waiting for the regulation to come, or they are proactive, and they're proactive in actually in self-adjusting their value creation model, self-correct their value creation model to take into account not only the negative, but also the positive externalities that they are creating. And the approach that we are making here at corporate level is this concept of true profit, which is all about bringing the value creation equation at the heart of the way companies are being managed. And that's actually, in my view, the bottom-up or corporate-led interpretation of the common prosperity, which is government-led. I would like to leave you with a last quote. You see, the word company that we use commonly in English come from two words in Latin, which is literally cum panis, which literally means the sharing of bread. So the purpose of a company is not about making profits. The purpose of company is to nurture fellowship, to nurture relationship, which is all about actually sharing the bread among each others. That's the real purpose of a company. Profit maximization or profit making is important, but secondary. Thank you. And if you want to know more, these are the two books that actually you can find, one in English and the one in Chinese.
Thank you, Bruno, for that overview. So I have a question for each of you and a same question for both of you. The question for Oliver is one that someone in the audience has asked, and he was asking if Oliver knows of any other countries like China that have a similar plan for common prosperity, and if yes, what are the interesting elements that these countries from China could consider? How can they integrate those two approaches?
To my knowledge, I'm not aware of any other countries adopt the common prosperity policies. I think the reason is China adopt this policy is due to our histories. Okay, so if we trace back 2,005 years ago, the Confucian, his philosophy is to promote the harmonies between the human beings and also advocate the harmonies between the human being and society. At the same period of time, there's another great philosophy in China is called the Lao Tzu. Okay, and he promoted harmonies between the human beings and the nature. So I think due to the root of the histories and this common prosperity philosophy is kind of embedded in our cultures, and plus the 70 years of socialism, socialist systems. So people tend to believe, and the government can achieve a better balance between efficiency and equity, and so that's why the Chinese Communist Party adopt this policy at this chunk of time, because we have sufficient resources to take care of those underprivileged peoples. And so that's why the focus has shifted from the efficiency to equity. This is my understanding.
Okay, thank you. And that's a segue into my question for both of you, but I want to postpone that for a minute and ask a question to Bruno. How does EOM differ from other schools of thought? One of the people in the audience were talking about B Corporation. Another one is, Porter and Kramer's shared value concept. How is EOM different from any of these other approaches or others?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I think it's a good question, and I'd like also to comment, but after my answer to what Oliver said. The B Corp and shared value actually started almost at the same time as Economics of Mutuality. So we started about in 2005, 2006. And I remember actually I had a conversation with the founder of B Corp and actually Michael Porter at the very beginning of our journey. And where EOM differs, it is EOM is all about understanding the next generation of value creation, and it's all about understanding that power relationship works, but is less efficient than mutual relationship among stakeholders. It also, what we propose is not about just shared value, is more about looking for opportunities at the periphery of the existing business model. And B Corp is all about actually providing a self-assessment or an external assessment of responsible behavior. What we are looking at is actually how to change the management account. We want to change management accounts to ensure that there is an optimum allocation of resources to maximize impact from the outset. So I'm judging about B Corp and shared value and economic community. We are in the same space, right? But we are looking for at different objectives. Our objective is, maybe because I'm coming from the finance sector, I saw that because finance was a problem, right? Finance must be the solution. And finance is a tool that can help allocate resources. At the moment, the P&L, the way it is organized, the financial P&L only captures a third of the value that's being created and or destroyed. It's actually a very, very ill-defined tool to equip business leaders to allocate resources. Our aim is to to trigger 75-80%, achieve at least 75-80% of the value. But for this, we need to expand the notion of P&L to cover non-financial capital. That's actually what we're looking for. And once we have this, then it's become much more easy to report to B Corp or to IFRAG or to ISSB, etc. But I think we are at a time when the value creation model for business is being changed, right? And business will have to understand that just measuring financial value creation or financial value destruction is not enough for the business to be prosperous, to grow, and to be resilient. It's much more, we need to add a layer of complexity. And the last point is that we know that on average, accounting changes every 100 years, okay? I mean, if you go back to I'm talking to a professor of finance, so you probably know the work of Pacioli, the founder of double accounting, and this Venetian monk invented the double entry accounting in the 16th century, and the historians of the economy believe that it was one of the innovations that actually helped the economy to grow in an amazing way. So I think we are at a similar Luca Pacioli moment, right? We don't need just a double entry accounting. We need a multiple entry accounting. And if we don't do that now, we are going to miss a big chunk of the upcoming prosperity. And that means actually that the money that we are creating within our business will not be allocated in the innovation that matters. So that's my answer. So this is actually where probably Economics of Mutuality is a bit more complex, a bit more sophisticated, but also it is a bit more just addressing at the core. We didn't start from a corporate social responsibility angle. We didn't start from a corporate reputation perspective. We said, okay, what is the right level of profit, not just to look good, but to ensure that the business that we are managing will endure. That's my response to your question, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you. So the question I have for both of you is how will these two concepts, common prosperity and economics of mutuality, how do you anticipate them changing the behavior of a business leader? What do you anticipate a business leader would do differently once they take on board either of these concepts? And maybe if you could go first, Bruno.
Well, I think, we are talking here of a systemic change, right? And in my view, a systemic change can only happen if we pull different triggers at the same time. And education is one. So education of existing and future business leaders is, in my view, a critical lever. Second one is the enlightened business leaders that actually are the pioneer, and that they understand actually that the way you make profit in 20th century is not going to be the same as the 21st century. The role of investors also. I mean, the way investors see the risk. You see, I'm always amazed because when people buy a car, for instance, right, they're not reluctant to pay for the insurance, right? So in a sense, investing in this kind of responsible practices is like buying an insurance company. Okay, it's a way to mitigate risk. And the fourth pillar is the regulation. So in a sense, in my view, the business and investment community will soon face the pressure from the regulation, and China is probably the most advanced country in that context with this common prosperity. But I think the EU is not far behind, and probably the Anglo-Saxon world is one step behind. But I think globally there will be the regulation will move up and force business leaders to think differently in terms of value creation. But the other pressure will come from the next generation of business leaders, people who are trained in MBAs. They are not in the same mindset. You can say that. So I think in a sense, as a business community, we should be aware of these two pressures coming up, like a pressure from regulation, but a pressure from the next generation of business leaders, which eventually will shift the way value creation is being managed. That's my view.
Okay, thank you. And Oliver, how would common prosperity change a business leader? And can business leaders outside of China take anything from this concept?
Yes, I totally agree with the Bruno's comments. He mentioned that the purpose of business is to provide a profitable solution to the problem of the people and the planet. I think it's a new movement or revolutions for the business models, and they have to be creative, find a profitable way to solve the older problem, because we are facing the pressures from the deteriorating the ecosystems and the pressures from the regulation, the next generation, and the social mediums. And so, as the business leader, as the owner of business, they have to change their mindset. So I think I just mentioned in the prisoner dilemmas. So people tend to maximize the individual wealth, then end up with lose-lose situations. So people have to change from individual rationality to collective rationalities. Okay, so in other words, people often abandon the best cooperation strategies on their own interest, which leading to a situation where long-term interests are compromised. So that's why I think as entrepreneurs or as the business leaders, they have to take into the time as another dimensions into their strategy makings. Okay, so the time you have to choose between the short term versus long term. You have to choose between the self-interest, profit maximization, and win-win scenarios from the short-term goals versus the long-term sustainable goals. So I think we are in a crossroads. Okay, so we are we're in the business revolution. I would say this is, I can sense that from the students from the CEIBS, okay, because I teach corporate social responsibility as the opening lectures for the coming EMBA students. So every year I will teach the corporate social responsibilities for more than 800 EMBA students. And I think they become more and more interested in this topic. So they are aware of the current the challenges faced by the human beings. Okay, so if we don't change our business models, and then we end up with the disasters. Okay, so everybody aware of that, and then we need to change our strategies, and we have to engage in the business revolution or the new business movement.
Okay, so there's a lot that people have to take on board. Do either of you have a prediction of a timeline or horizon when we might see real progress at least at the business level or even at the country level towards this shared value or I mean towards this mutuality or common prosperity?
I'm kind of cautious optimistic about in terms of time horizons, because if we review the histories of corporate social responsibility movement, so I would classify into 3 or 4 stages. So first is the CSR 1.0. At that time, which is back to 1930s. Okay, so CSR is just was a voluntary behavior of those business owners, and the CSR is unrelated to the profits and does not seek any returns. So you use a term which is make the business owner feel good. Okay, so this is the CSR 1.0. Okay, it takes about 30 years or 40 years. then move to advance to CSO 2.0. Okay, at that stage, the social stress, the corporate response to the social stress. Okay, and they tend to use the CSR as the way to diminish the social risk, and they engage in a stakeholder management. Okay, but at that time, the CSR is indirectly related to the corporate financial performance. So basically, the CSR 2.0 just makes firm looks good. Okay, and then takes another 30 years. Okay, move to CSR 3.0s. Okay, so then this is what we're talking about, the freight shared values, B Corps, and the economics of the mutualities. Okay, emerges. Okay, so at this stage, corporate those responsible business leaders, they consider the CSR as a corporate strategist. So the CSR is closely related to the business strategy and the competitiveness of the corporate. Okay, so that means doing good for doing well by doing good. Okay, so this is stage. So you see, each advance takes about 20 to 30 years. So that's why I'm kind of cautious, optimistic about the time horizon. Maybe in 10 or 20 years, and the EOM, the common prosperity, will become the consensus of business leaders.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with this. I mean, I like the way you phrase the different phases, Oliver. When I was starting this journey about 20 years ago now, I did a bit of a study about what are the drivers of altruism. And there are essentially three drivers. There is the look good, the feel good, and the do good. And actually you can argue that the first wave of CSR was look good.
Yeah.
Just for corporate reputation. Then second wave is about feel good. Okay.
Feel good, yes. Okay.
But it's all actually the do good is a third wave. And actually, I think we are moving into a time when that's why I was talking about this concept of systemic change. You can't change a system just by pulling one lever. And I think, my view, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's a government-led intervention and education are the two most effective levers to change the way business leaders are going to behave. Because human beings are lazy, right? And actually, most of the people who are running the business are in their 50s or plus. And you know what? We know that it takes much more energy, mental energy, to unlearn than to learn. And therefore, I think there is a real, I mean, I'm talking here to business leaders. You need to unlearn a number of things, actually, in order to embrace the new value creation paradigm. How long it's going to take? I just don't know. I think, actually, that countries like China and to some extent continental Europe will shift more quickly because it corresponds to their deep roots culturally. You see, you talked about Lao Tzu and you talked about Confucius, which actually are rooted in like several thousand years of in the Chinese culture. And the concept of common prosperity, the concept of mutuality resonates almost naturally with the deep psyche. To some extent, you can find the same sort of resonance in the Western Europe, like continental Europe, because it's deeply rooted in social democracy. It's deeply the role of government, that not everything is meant to be monetized. It's actually deeply rooted in the psyche of the Western Northern Europe, right? In the sense, what's the sociologist Max Weber called the Protestant ethics, right, and the spirit of capitalism. In my view, the Anglo-Saxon world, because it's so much driven by market efficiency and market power, will take a while to adjust with this. So I think we may actually come up with, Peter, with some sort of like a different level of acceptance across different parts of the world. The big question for me is Africa, because Africa will become soon the largest continent of the world. the youngest continent of the world, which also has access to the vast majority of the natural resources. So, I think if you were to focus actually in terms of impact, I think like focusing on management education of African continent would be by far where you can have the most return on investment in terms of what you talk about.
Okay, thank you. So I see a couple questions from our guests. And this one says, has there ever been a situation in humanity where the ideal of common prosperity or economics of mutuality has ever existed? Is this something that is realistic to achieve? Would either of you want?
I'm happy just to give a very short answer. The beauty is in the journey, not in the destination.
Okay.
So I think it is very difficult to attain this kind of noble goal, but
right.
We need. I mean, the beauty or the joy will come from journeying towards this goal.
Right. And I think more of us.
I totally agree. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a journey. It's a journey. So actually, this I would describe like light spectrums. So there's a very wide ranges. Okay, so if you consider the for-profit organization or corporate as a zero, and a non-profit NGO is 1, from 0 to 1, it can be many steps. It could be 0.1, 0.2, and up to 0.9 and to 1. I think EOM is like 0.6. Okay, close to 1. But lots of firms, they are still at the 0 stage. So when I teach my EMBA students, I'm not like ask them to become 1 immediately. Okay, so you have to change the mindset first. So that's why we develop at CEIBS, we call the real situation learning courses. So I will take the students to the company. I think they have a best business practice in terms of CSR, the ESGs, so they can sense it. Okay, they can. So that will change their mindset. So my understanding is the range of spectrum is wide. Okay, so we can have a B Corp in the middle. We can have social entrepreneurs. We can have a social corporations. Then we can have the firm using the EOM as their main strategies. Okay, eventually there will be a corporation. They are innovative enough. They can use profitable solution to solve all the social issues.
Yeah.
Perhaps the more we can get our students to commit to the journey rather than any particular destination will lead them to thinking they look good and actually feeling good and maybe even trying to do more good. Yeah, I think this idea about the journey is very important.
But the journey is important, and again, just to be clear about, I had like almost 15 years of experience now in that space, and I think there is also different steps. There is always a sweet spots where actually, for instance, just simple thing like investing in your workforce, investing in the well-being of your employees, for instance, pays off very quickly. I mean, we have thousands of studies that actually show that when you invest in the human capital of your company, it pays off, right? Good management practices, good governance, it really pays off. I mean, this is actually a way to engage leaders. And then, so the sweet spots are relatively easy to identify, right, in any organizations, and you don't need to rocket science approach. When it becomes more complex, then you have to solve a systemic breakdown in the ecosystem into which you operate and from which you depend in the long run. And this kind of fixing this kind of breakdown requires most of the time public-private partnership, so multiple stakeholders intervention. And this is where actually government can play a real role in orchestrating the different players to solve a problem. But when you fix a problem in the ecosystem, you are usually the first one to get the benefit from it. And Peter, we've been working on a few case studies, and it's a good business case. It's a bit like investing in marketing or in R&D. You should expect actually a return from fixing a problem, which actually is related to your ecosystem, but it requires a different mindset, and it's not immediate. That's why, again, I insist, I know I'm speaking to CEIBS, I'm speaking to business school. It's critically important to shift the teaching of business curriculum. My vision, my dream is that in a not too distant future, we will teach this responsible management education as a primary course, and we will teach the Milton Friedman as an elective. That would be, to me, the ultimate goal. That what you're talking about, Oliver, should be actually not an elective, but a primary curriculum. And then eventually talked about Milton Friedman and the Chicago School of Thought as part of the history of economy, but no longer as being relevant to the challenge that we are facing today.
Bruno, I know that you've been working with a variety of teams here in China to implement or explore opportunities for EOM. Do you want to talk a little bit about the struggle and the progress that you've made on that front?
Yeah, it was to me. I would say that the beautiful thing about China is that, as I said earlier on, Oliver, the Chinese culture is very conducive to this kind of mutuality concept. So you don't need to convince them. It's like speaking the same language. Then, of course, the implementation of it is much more challenging because, again, China is a very complex, a very large large country with facing also a lot of issues. But Peter, that we have we done the case studies together with CEIBS in the past, which shows actually that there is a real business case for implementing mutuality or the economics of mutuality principle in the way you're managing things. So again, I would say that it's been challenging to implement EOM in China, but less than in the West. Yeah. It's like any innovation. Innovation faces some struggle, but I'm always amazed. That's why I hope actually I can go back to China soon. I haven't been to China because of COVID for a long time, but every time I go to China, I feel like we're almost speaking the same language, although I don't speak Chinese.
So my last question is implicit in the statement, what is the right level of profit? Implicit in that is that it's not maximization. And also, Oliver, implicit in the prisoner's dilemma is if you don't want to be stuck in jail forever, then it's not profit maximization. It's got to be cooperation. So, but how do we get people away from this almost automatically accepted and never questioned goal?
Well, you see, it's all about the right level of profit is the one which would actually maximize the true profit.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And I suppose it's the same with the prisoner's dilemma that, you maximize the mutual benefit to both rather than to one.
So I would call it collective rationalities. It can be individual rationalities. It could be collectives. Yeah. So I think in the Chinese cultures, we focus on the collectivism instead of individualisms. So I think it's, as Bruno says, we share the same language.
And to believe that also the human being is highly relational. So actually you are always who you are in the eyes of the others. So individualism is very incomplete definition actually of a human's identity. You are who you are because you are part of a collective group. It doesn't mean actually you don't have unique personality or unique contribution, but you always define yourself in the eyes of the others. So, and again, the right level of profit is actually financial profit is the one that would maximize the true profit. And we now have the tools actually to help define this. Okay? And that's super important. And then this tool can actually help companies to start moving away from value extraction to mutual value creation.
Right.
I repeat that. This tool can help companies move away from value extraction to mutual value creation.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think the focus here is the true profit. There are lots of externality has not been incorporated in the cost. That's right. So we have to find out the accurate measurement on the true cost. Then we have the true profit. So my belief is we have to internalize all those externalities.
Right.
Then it is also individual rationality to do the EOMs.
Indeed. Yeah. So you see, again, we speak the same language.
In fact, Milton Friedman's comment that the most socially responsible thing to do is maximize profit. It only works when there are no externalities. So basically, he's saying the same thing, but he's ignoring the fact that we do have externalities.
But also, I mean, we have to remember that he said that at a time when natural resources were considered infinite.
Right.
Okay? Yes.
Yeah.
And also in terms of human and social capital, considered as infinite, not a problem. So he could actually focus on what was scarce, which was financial capital. Today, we have different forms of scarcity. So it would be absurd to keep a model which is focusing on the wrong type of scarcity.
Right.
It's not being ideological, it's just being rational.
So you've both given us some concrete hope that we're going to progress beyond just complaining and talking about these things to doing something. Hopefully it'll stimulate action among our students and business leaders and governments too. Thank you both.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you.